If you care about growing tomatoes that actually deliver heavy harvests and deep root systems instead of tall, weak plants, this video is for you, so make sure you subscribe to Evergreen Garden, leave a comment, and, share this with another gardener who's tired of average results. Today I'm going to walk you through a powerful Soviet tomato growing method that modern gardening has largely forgotten, yet it consistently outperformed conventional techniques in harsh climates where failure wasn't an option. This method was developed out of necessity, not trends. During the Soviet era, gardeners didn't have access to endless fertilizers, hybrid seeds, or climate-controlled greenhouses. What they did have was short growing seasons, unpredictable weather, and poor soils. The method that emerged focused on one thing above all else: forcing tomatoes to build massive underground root systems before worrying about what happens above the soil. This approach became known through the work of Russian agronomist Igor Maslov, and it directly challenges the way most people plant tomatoes today. The core principle is planting tomatoes horizontally, not vertically. Modern gardeners are taught to plant tomatoes upright like trees. The Soviet method does the opposite. Instead of planting a seedling straight down, you lay it on its side in a shallow trench, burying almost the entire stem and leaving only the top 10 to 15 centimeters exposed above the soil. Tomatoes naturally form roots along any buried stem, and by planting horizontally, you turn the entire stem into a root-producing engine. In practice, this means digging a trench about 8 to 10 centimeters deep and long enough to accommodate the seedling laid flat. The roots go at one end, the top of the plant points upward, and the rest of the stem is gently curved and covered with soil. Within just a few days, the exposed tip turns upward toward the sun, while underground the buried stem explodes with new roots. Why does this method produce stronger plants and heavier harvests? Well, a tomato planted this way develops 2 to 3 times the root mass of a vertically planted tomato. More roots mean more water uptake, more nutrient absorption, and far greater resistance to drought and heat stress. Soviet trials showed that plants grown using this method required less frequent watering and produced larger, more uniform fruits, simply because the plant was never struggling to feed itself. For gardeners, this translates into fewer blossom drop issues, thicker stems, and a plant that can support heavy fruit loads without snapping or collapsing. This is especially valuable for indeterminate tomatoes that grow tall and fruit continuously. Soil preparation matters, but it doesn't need to be complicated. Soviet gardeners focused on biology rather than bottled inputs. Before laying the plant into the trench, they enrich the soil with simple organic matter. A proven ratio is mixing 1 part well-rotted compost with 2 parts native soil. If compost is scarce, aged manure diluted at a ratio of 1 part manure to 5 parts soil works equally well. A small handful of crushed eggshells or wood ash was often added beneath the stem to supply calcium and potassium slowly over the season. This reduces blossom end rot without relying on liquid supplements later. Watering strategy changes completely with this method. Because the root system spreads horizontally rather than plunging straight down, watering becomes more efficient. Instead of frequent shallow watering, the Soviet approach favors deep, infrequent watering. Once the plant is established, watering deeply once every 5 to 7 days encourages roots to keep expanding outward. So, let's look at a practical example. It's often best to apply about 5 liters of water per plant in one slow soaking, rather than giving them daily splashes. In sandy soils, you might need to increase that to around 7 liters, while clay soils may require a little less. The main goal here is to keep moisture available deeper in the soil, where the expanded root network really lives. Another often overlooked part of the Soviet method is actually how tomatoes are supported. Instead of using rigid vertical stakes that force all the weight onto a single stem, it's better to allow plants to sprawl slightly or tie them at multiple points along the stem. As the buried stem continues to produce roots, the plant naturally anchors itself more securely. Some gardeners even go a step further and lightly mound soil against the stem later in the season, covering another 5 centimeters of growth. This simple step triggers additional root formation and further stabilizes the plant while also increasing nutrient uptake. Pruning is, well, minimal and strategic here, not aggressive at all. Unlike a lot of modern advice that encourages heavy pruning, the Soviet method keeps things simple and light. Only the lowest leaves that are actually touching the soil are removed, mainly to prevent disease. Side shoots are in fact allowed to grow, especially those near the base. The reason is they can be gently bent and partially buried, so they form new fruiting stems with their own roots. For example, if you have a healthy side shoot about 20 centimeters long, you can bend it down, cover it with soil halfway, and just leave it to grow upright. Within about 2 weeks, that buried section will root and behave almost like a second plant, still attached to the first. Fertilization here relies on timing, not so much on quantity. Rather than constant feeding, Soviet gardeners focused on 2 really critical moments. The first feeding happens 2 weeks after planting, using a diluted compost tea at a ratio of 1 part compost tea to 4 parts water. The second feeding comes at first flowering, often with fermented plant teas or diluted manure water at 1 part manure to 10 parts water. So this controlled approach actually prevents excessive leaf growth and, it pushes the plant's energy toward flowering and fruit set instead. So why did modern gardeners abandon this method, and honestly, why shouldn't they have? Well, this approach fell out of favor, mainly because it just doesn't look neat or, commercial. It takes up a bit more space, asks you to think a bit differently about how plants grow, and frankly, it doesn't fit that mass production aesthetic. But for home gardeners and serious growers who really care about yield, resilience, and of course flavor, it remains one of the most effective tomato techniques ever developed. Plants grown this way don't panic under heat. They recover faster from stress, and time and again, they outproduce conventionally planted tomatoes, especially when conditions are less than perfect. If you found this guide valuable and want more time-tested gardening methods that actually work, make sure you subscribe to Evergreen Garden, share this video with another grower, and leave a comment below, telling me if you've tried deep or horizontal tomato planting before. This channel is all about practical, proven gardening that stands the test of time.